The F-22 Raptor screamed through Nevada airspace at 38,000 feet, its pilot's voice crackling through the radio with barely contained confusion. "Control, this is Viper 17. I need confirmation on that call sign. Did you say Angel of Death?" In the control tower at Nellis Air Force Base, 23-year-old Lieutenant Marcus Webb nearly choked on his coffee. Around him, a cluster of fresh-faced flight cadets erupted in poorly suppressed laughter. The woman standing behind them didn't flinch. Commander Catalina "Kit" Volkov remained motionless, her weathered hands clasped behind her back, gray-streaked auburn hair pulled into a regulation bun that had seen better decades. "Affirmative, Viper 17, came the controlled response from Master Sergeant Rodriguez at the radio console. "Your training instructor today is Angel of Death. Please acknowledge." The silence that followed stretched like a held breath. Through the tower's floor-to-ceiling windows, the Raptor was barely visible, a distant speck against the endless blue. But everyone in that room could feel the weight of what was happening 38,000 feet above their heads. "Control," the pilot's voice returned, noticeably different now, uncertain. "Angel of Death, that's actually her." Webb exchanged glances with his fellow cadets. They'd been joking about their new instructor for weeks. A washed-up nurse-turned-pilot, older than most of their fathers, assigned to teach air combat maneuvers to the military's most elite aviators. The whole thing seemed like some cosmic joke. Kit Volkov looked more like someone who should be administering flu shots than commanding respect from F-22 pilots. "Viper 17, you are cleared for engagement," Rodriguez's voice cut through the tension. "Angel of Death is inbound from your 6 o'clock, Angels 28, velocity classified." In the sudden quiet that followed, Kit finally moved. She stepped forward to the radio console, her voice steady as mountain stone when she keyed the microphone. "Good morning, Viper 17. This is Angel of Death. I hope you're ready to learn something today." The cadet's laughter had died completely now. Something in her tone, not threatening, not boastful, just absolutely certain, made the hair on Webb's arm stand up. "Angel of Death, The F-22 pilot's transmission cut short. On the radar screen, a new contact appeared from seemingly nowhere, moving faster than physics should allow. The targeting computer struggled to maintain lock as the mysterious aircraft closed distance with impossible precision. "What the hell is that?" Webb whispered, staring at the display. Kit's reflection smiled back from the tower windows. "That, Lieutenant, is why they call me Angel of Death." The morning sun caught the insignia on Kit's collar, wings crossed with a medical caduceus, a symbol that told a story none of these young pilots could possibly understand. Not yet. She had been dismissed, underestimated, and overlooked for the last time. Today, 38,000 feet above the Nevada desert, the legend of Angel of Death would be written in contrails and humility. The radio crackled again. "Angel of Death, where did you come from?" Kit's smile widened as she watched her custom-built F-16 Viper dance through the sky like a silver ghost, defying every law of aerial combat these cadets thought they knew. "Patience, Viper 17. Class is just beginning." Commander Catalina Volkov hadn't always been a pilot. 27 years ago, she had been Captain Kit Volkov, United States Army combat medic, stationed in a forward operating base outside Kandahar when the impossible became routine. The smell of cordite and antiseptic had been her world then, not jet fuel and altitude. Her hands, now steady on flight controls, had once moved with the same precision through battlefield surgery. Under canvas tents with mortar rounds falling like deadly rain, she had learned that life and death were separated by milliseconds and millimeters. The same principle, she discovered years later, applied to aerial combat. The transition hadn't been easy. At 34, she was ancient by flight school standards. While 22-year-old hotshots performed barrel rolls and celebrated perfect landings, Kit studied aerodynamics with the methodical intensity of someone who understood that mastery meant survival. Her medical background gave her an edge they couldn't comprehend. She understood the human body's relationship with G-forces, spatial orientation, and stress responses in ways that turned aerial combat into a science. Now, 17 years later, she commanded the sky with the same life-saving precision she had once used to save Marines in dusty field hospitals. Every maneuver was calculated. Every decision weighted against outcomes measured in lives rather than victories. But respect hadn't come automatically. The call sign, Angel of Death, wasn't given. It was earned over the mountains of Afghanistan, where she had flown medical evacuation missions in helicopters held together by prayers and maintenance tape. When conventional pilots wouldn't fly, when weather grounded entire squadrons, Angel of Death had lifted off into impossible conditions because wounded soldiers didn't have time to wait for better circumstances. The name followed her through flight transitions, from rotary wing to fixed wing, from medical evacuation to air combat training. What started as recognition of her medical corps background evolved into something else entirely when other pilots realized that Kit Volkov didn't just understand death, she commanded it. Angel of Death, your position shows impossible. Viper 17's voice carried a note of genuine bewilderment. Radar has you simultaneously at Angels 25 and Angels 32. Kit's response was calm, almost conversational. Electronic warfare, Viper 17. Your bird might be stealthy, but stealth is just another system to be defeated. In Afghanistan, we called it battlefield awareness. Here, I call it homework. Through the tower windows, Webb watched two aircraft dance through impossible geometries. The F-22 Raptor, pride of American air power, moved like a wounded elephant compared to the silver ghost that seemed to appear and disappear at will. The truth was simpler than the cadets realized and more complex than they could imagine. Kit had spent years learning not just how to fly, but how to think like her opponents, understand their systems, exploit their assumptions. She had transformed aerial combat from a contest of machines into a test of minds. Her F-16, modified with experimental electronic countermeasures, and flown by someone who understood that victory belonged to whoever made fewer mistakes, had become something unprecedented in American airspace. A 20-year-old fighter that could outmaneuver billion-dollar fifth-generation technology through pure tactical intelligence. Viper 17, Kit's voice carried the patience of a teacher and the authority of someone who had earned every word. You're thinking like a machine. Try thinking like a human. Lieutenant Webb pressed his face against the glass, watching his worldview reshape itself at supersonic speed. The engagement lasted 14 minutes and 37 seconds. By minute 3, Viper 17 had lost radar lock permanently. By minute 7, he had been shot down twice using theoretical weapons systems that shouldn't have been able to target his aircraft. By minute 12, his voice had changed completely. Angel of Death, I don't understand how you're doing this. Kit's response came through perfectly clear radio transmission, though radar showed her aircraft in positions that should have made communication impossible. Understanding comes with experience, Viper 17. Experience comes with time. Time comes with staying alive long enough to learn. In the control tower, the laughing had stopped completely. 23 faces pressed against windows, watching the impossible unfold in real time. Master Sergeant Rodriguez worked his radio console with the focused intensity of someone witnessing history. Break, 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 came a new voice, Colonel James Harrison, base commander, joining the exercise from his command aircraft. Angel of Death, this is Olympus Actual, requesting permission to observe. Permission granted, Olympus Actual, Kit responded without missing a beat. Please maintain safe distance. We're about to demonstrate advanced defensive maneuvers. What followed redefined everyone's understanding of physics, tactics, and humility. Kit's F-16 seemed to fold space around itself, appearing in places radar insisted were empty, disappearing from locations where visual confirmation showed solid aircraft. She moved through three-dimensional space like a surgeon's hands through a patient's body, precise, inevitable, absolutely controlled. Colonel Harrison's voice, when it finally came, carried the weight of 30 years military experience. "Angel of Death, where did you learn to fly like that?" "I didn't learn to fly like this, sir," Kit replied, her aircraft now maintaining perfect formation with both the F-22 and Harrison's F-35. "I learned to save lives. Flying like this was just the logical extension." Webb found himself holding his breath. Around him, 22 other cadets stood in complete silence, watching their assumptions about aviation, authority, and ability crumble at 30,000 feet. The demonstration concluded with Kit's aircraft performing a maneuver that radar operators would later describe as physically impossible. A simultaneous climb and descent that left her positioned exactly where she had started, while both pursuing aircraft found themselves outflanked and destroyed by theoretical missiles they never saw coming. "Gentlemen," Kit's voice filled the control tower with quiet authority, "class dismissed. Please return to base for debriefing." As the three aircraft began their descent toward Nellie's, Webb realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the recognition that he had just witnessed something unprecedented. The woman they had been mocking for weeks hadn't just outflown two of America's most advanced fighter aircraft. She had done it while teaching, maintaining perfect radio discipline, and never once raising her voice or losing her composure. "Holy shit," whispered Cadet Johnson, speaking for all of them. Master Sergeant Rodriguez turned from his console, his expression mixing respect with something approaching awe. "Language, Cadet. You're in the presence of a legend." The landing pattern at Nellie's Air Force Base had seen thousands of aircraft over the decades, but rarely had so many people gathered to watch three planes touch down. Word had spread through the base with the speed of electronic communications and old-fashioned amazement. Maintenance crews, administrative personnel, off-duty pilots, and even civilian contractors found reasons to be near the flight line as Angel of Death brought her F-16 home. Kit's landing was textbook perfect, not showy, not aggressive, just technically flawless in the way that demonstrated complete mastery without needing to prove anything. Her aircraft touched down with barely a whisper of rubber against concrete, rolled to a stop with minimal brake usage, and taxied to the designated spot with the precision of someone who had performed this exact sequence thousands of times. The F-22 landed 90 seconds later, followed by Colonel Harrison's F-35. Both landings were competent, professional, regulation perfect. But after watching Angel of Death's aerial demonstration, they seemed almost mundane by comparison. Lieutenant Webb and his fellow cadets had rushed down from the control tower, joining the growing crowd around the flight line. They maintained respectful distance, military protocol demanded it, but their eyes tracked every movement as Kit's canopy opened, and she began her post-flight procedures. She moved with the same methodical precision in the cockpit that she had displayed in the air. Equipment secured, systems powered down, safety checks completed. Nothing hurried, nothing forgotten. When she finally climbed down from her aircraft, removing her helmet to reveal gray-streaked hair damp with perspiration, she looked exactly like what she was, a professional aviator who had just completed another day's work. "Commander Volkov," Colonel Harrison approached with the purposeful stride of someone who needed answers. Behind him, the F-22 pilot, Captain Jeremy Mitchell, Webb now recognized, walked with the slightly stunned expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been challenged at high altitude. "Yes, sir." Kit's response was perfectly regulation, but Webb noticed she was suppressing a smile. "Commander, I need to understand what I just witnessed up there." "That was—" Harrison paused, searching for words that could adequately describe impossible physics made routine. That was unprecedented. Kit nodded, her expression becoming more serious. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to conduct the debriefing with all personnel present. What we demonstrated today has implications beyond individual training. Around the flight line, conversations had stopped. Maintenance crews pretended to work while straining to hear every word. Administrative clerks discovered urgent business that required their presence near the aircraft. Even the base security guards had found reasons to patrol closer to the action. Captain Mitchell stepped forward, his voice carrying a mixture of professional curiosity and personal humility that Webb had never heard from an F-22 pilot before. Commander, I need to know, how long have you been able to fly like that? Kit's smile became genuine now, the expression of someone who had waited years for the right question. Captain, I've been flying like that since I learned that air combat and trauma surgery follow the same basic principles. The only difference is altitude. She gestured toward her F-16, its silver fuselage reflecting Nevada sunlight like a mirror. This aircraft has been modified with electronic warfare systems developed for special operations. Combined with tactics adapted from medical evacuation procedures under hostile fire, it becomes something that most pilots never encounter in training. Electronic warfare against an F-22. Mitchell's question carried genuine bewilderment. Sir, my aircraft is designed to be invisible to every known radar system. Captain, Kit's voice took on the patient tone of an instructor. Your aircraft is invisible to known radar systems. Unknown radar systems are a different conversation entirely. Webb felt his understanding of military aviation shift fundamentally. This wasn't about superior technology or natural talent. This was about someone who had approached a familiar problem from a completely different direction and discovered solutions that no one else had considered. Colonel Harrison's expression suggested he was reaching similar conclusions. Commander, I think we need to have a much longer conversation about the implications of what you've just demonstrated. The debriefing session took place in Nellis Air Force Base's main briefing room, a sterile environment of white walls, fluorescent lighting, and chairs arranged in precise military rows. What should have been a routine post-exercise discussion had evolved into something unprecedented. A room filled with pilots, instructors, base command staff, and a cluster of cadets who had been granted permission to observe history in the making. Kit stood at the front of the room beside a large display screen, her flight suit exchanged for regulation dress uniform that somehow made her appear more formidable rather than less. The silver oak leaves on her collar caught the artificial light, but it was the expression on her face that commanded attention, calm, professional, and absolutely confident. Gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying easily through the room, what you witnessed today was the practical application of asymmetric warfare principles to air combat. The same strategies that allow smaller forces to defeat larger ones can be adapted to allow older aircraft to outmaneuver newer technology. Captain Mitchell sat in the front row, his notebook open, writing with the intensity of someone trying to document a revelation. Behind him, Webb and his fellow cadets leaned forward, afraid to miss a single word. The F-22 Raptor, Kit continued, gesturing toward Mitchell, is an extraordinary aircraft designed around stealth technology and superior avionics. Its capabilities are well documented and, frankly, intimidating to most potential adversaries. But like any system, it has assumptions built into its design. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, a technical diagram showing radar signatures and electronic emissions. These assumptions become vulnerabilities when confronted by tactics designed specifically to exploit them. Colonel Harrison interrupted from his position along the wall. Commander, are you suggesting that stealth technology can be consistently defeated by modified F-16s? No, sir. Kit's response was immediate and precise. I'm demonstrating that stealth technology can be consistently defeated by modified thinking. The F-16 is just the platform." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of air conditioning and the scratch of pens on paper. Webb realized he was holding his breath again, waiting for explanations that would reshape everything he thought he knew about aerial combat. Kit clicked to the next slide, a photograph of a field hospital in Afghanistan, showing medical personnel working under canvas while helicopter rotors spun in the background. My background in combat medicine taught me that life-and-death situations require thinking beyond standard procedures. When conventional approaches fail, survival depends on adapting to circumstances that weren't covered in training. She paused, her eyes moving across the room, making contact with each person present. Air combat, I discovered, follows the same principles. When you understand your opponent's systems better than they do, when you can predict their responses and manipulate their decision-making process, superior technology becomes irrelevant. Captain Mitchell raised his hand, his voice respectful but persistent. "Commander, with respect, understanding systems is one thing. What you did up there, that was something else entirely." Kit's smile returned, the expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly that observation. "Captain, what I did up there was apply 17 years of experience in keeping people alive when conventional wisdom said it was impossible. Every maneuver, every tactic, every decision was based on principles I learned saving Marines' lives in conditions that weren't supposed to allow for survival." She clicked to a new slide showing her modified F-16's technical specifications. This aircraft carries electronic warfare systems originally developed for medical evacuation helicopters operating in hostile airspace. When adapted to air-to-air combat, they create capabilities that most pilots never encounter in training or combat. The implications began settling over the room like the dawn of a new age. Webb watched Colonel Harrison's expression change as the full scope of what they had witnessed became clear. This wasn't just about one exceptional pilot or one modified aircraft. This was about a completely different approach to aerial warfare that challenged every assumption the military had been making about air superiority. "Commander," Harrison's voice carried the weight of someone grappling with strategic implications. "How long have you been developing these capabilities?" Kit's answer came with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating obvious truth. "Sir, I've been developing these capabilities since my first medical evacuation mission in 2008. Everything that happened today was just the practical application of lessons learned keeping helicopters in the air when enemy forces had every technical advantage except experience." She clicked to the final slide, a simple text display reading, "Experience is the only teacher that gives the test first and the lesson afterward." Below it, in smaller text, "Afghanistan, 2008-2012, 847 successful medical evacuations under hostile fire, 0 losses." The silence that followed was profound and complete. 23 cadets, a dozen instructors, base command staff, and 2 elite fighter pilots sat in absolute quiet, absorbing the realization that they had just witnessed the emergence of something unprecedented in American military aviation. Lieutenant Webb looked around the room at faces that reflected his own amazement. The woman they had been mocking for weeks hadn't just outflown superior aircraft. She had revolutionized their understanding of what was possible in aerial combat. "Questions?" Kit asked, her voice cutting through the silence with gentle authority. Captain Mitchell's hand rose slowly. When Kit nodded, he stood up with the formal bearing of someone addressing a superior officer, which, Webb realized, was exactly what was happening. "Commander," Mitchell's voice carried a humility that 23 cadets had never heard from an F-22 pilot, "I need to ask, how many pilots know how to do what you just did?" Kit's expression became very serious. "Captain, as of this morning, that number was 1. As of this afternoon, She looked around the room, her eyes settling on each face with particular attention. That depends entirely on how seriously everyone in this room takes what they learned today. The weight of responsibility settled over the briefing room like a physical presence. Webb felt it in his chest, a recognition that they had been entrusted with something far more significant than advanced flying techniques. They had been shown the future of aerial combat, delivered by someone who had earned the right to teach it through years of keeping people alive, when conventional wisdom said it couldn't be done. Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his expression mixing authority with genuine respect. "Commander, I think we need to discuss the broader implications of what you've developed. This goes well beyond individual training exercises." Kit nodded, her demeanor shifting subtly from instructor to strategic advisor. "Sir, I agree completely. What we demonstrated today represents capabilities that could fundamentally change how the Air Force approaches peer-to-peer combat scenarios." She gestured toward the technical specifications still displayed on the screen. "These modifications can be applied to existing aircraft at a fraction of the cost of developing new platforms. More importantly, the tactical principles can be taught to any pilot willing to think beyond current doctrine." "Willing to think like a combat medic, you mean?" Captain Mitchell interjected, his tone carrying newfound understanding. "Willing to think like someone whose primary mission is keeping people alive," Kit corrected gently. "Whether that's patients in a field hospital or wingmen in contested airspace, the fundamental principles remain the same." Webb found himself thinking about the implications that stretched far beyond this room, this base, this training exercise. If Kit's methods could be systematized, taught, and deployed across the Air Force, it would represent the kind of revolutionary advancement that changed the balance of global military power. But more immediately, it would mean that everything he and his fellow cadets thought they knew about becoming pilots would need to be reconsidered from the ground up. "Commander," Webb found himself speaking before he realized he had raised his hand. "You're saying that medical training made you a better combat pilot?" Kit turned toward him, her expression thoughtful. "Lieutenant, I'm saying that learning to make life-and-death decisions under extreme stress, with incomplete information, using tools that weren't designed for the conditions you're facing, while maintaining absolute precision because failure means people die. Yes, that made me a better combat pilot." She paused, looking around the room again. "But more than that, it taught me that the difference between success and failure usually comes down to preparation, adaptability, and refusal to accept that something is impossible just because it's difficult." Colonel Harrison moved to the front of the room, his expression suggesting decisions were being made in real time. "Commander, I want you to develop a formal training program based on what you've demonstrated. I want these capabilities evaluated, systematized, and prepared for broader implementation." "Yes, sir," Kit's response was immediate and professional. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, "I want you to identify pilots who show aptitude for this type of unconventional thinking. If we're going to revolutionize air combat, we need to start with people who can think beyond current limitations." He turned toward the assembled cadets, his gaze settling on each of them with particular intensity. "Gentlemen, you have just witnessed the emergence of next-generation aerial warfare. How you respond to this opportunity will determine not just your careers, but potentially the future effectiveness of American air power." The weight of that responsibility settled over the room like a physical presence, transforming what had begun as routine training into something approaching destiny. 3 weeks after the demonstration that changed everything, Nellie's Air Force Base had transformed into something resembling a think tank with runways. Kit's temporary office, hastily established in a converted briefing room, had become the epicenter of what was being quietly referred to as the Angel of Death Project. The official designation was more bureaucratic, Advanced Asymmetric Air Combat Development Program. But among the pilots, maintenance crews, and administrative staff who witnessed the daily miracle of conventional aircraft performing impossible maneuvers. Kit's call sign had become synonymous with revolution itself. Lieutenant Webb stood outside her office at 6:30 hours, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he worked up the courage to knock. Through the thin door, he could hear Kit's voice engaged in what sounded like a technical discussion with someone over encrypted communication. Her tone was patient but precise, the voice of someone explaining complex concepts to people who needed to understand them perfectly. When the conversation ended, Webb finally knocked. "Enter," came Kit's immediate response. He found her surrounded by technical manuals, computer displays showing aircraft schematics, and whiteboards covered with diagrams that looked like advanced physics mixed with medical charts. She was dressed in flight suit, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in the practical bun he had come to associate with absolute competence. "Lieutenant Webb," she said without looking up from the technical manual she was annotating, "you're early for your 700 appointment." Webb blinked, realizing he had no appointment scheduled. "Ma'am, I—" "Sit down, Lieutenant." Kit's voice carried gentle authority. "We need to talk." He took the chair across from her desk. Noticing that the technical manuals were marked with classifications he didn't have clearance to see. Whatever Kit was working on had attracted attention from much higher in the command structure than Nellie's Air Force Base. "Lieutenant," Kit finally looked up, her expression serious but not unkind. "You've been standing outside my office every morning for a week. Either you have questions you need answered, or you're conducting surveillance. Either way, we should probably address the situation directly." Webb felt heat rise in his cheeks, caught between embarrassment and admiration for her observational skills. "Ma'am, I have questions about what you demonstrated, about how someone learns to think the way you think." Kit leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same analytical intensity she had brought to aerial combat. "Lieutenant, what's your background before flight school?" "Engineering, ma'am. Aerospace engineering from Caltech. I thought I understood aircraft systems, flight dynamics, all the technical aspects." He paused, struggling to articulate thoughts that had been keeping him awake for weeks. "What you did up there, it wasn't just flying. It was something else entirely." "It was problem solving," Kit replied simply. "Everything else was just application." She pulled out a fresh whiteboard marker and began drawing what looked like a medical diagram, human anatomy showing circulatory and nervous systems. "Lieutenant, tell me what you see." Webb studied the drawing, recognizing biological structures from basic science courses. "Human cardiovascular and nervous systems, ma'am." "Good. Now tell me what an aircraft looks like from a systems perspective." Understanding began to dawn as Webb visualized aircraft schematics in his mind. Hydraulic systems, electrical systems, fuel systems. They're analogous to biological systems. Kit nodded, adding aircraft components to her diagram, showing the parallels between biological and mechanical systems. Both are complex systems that can fail in predictable ways under stress. Both require understanding interactions between subsystems to diagnose problems and implement solutions. She drew connecting lines between similar systems. "When I was working trauma cases in Afghanistan, I learned to read human systems under extreme stress. Heart rate, blood pressure, neurological responses, they all provided information about what was failing and what could be saved." Webb watched the diagram evolve, seeing connections he had never considered between medical practice and aviation systems management. "When I transitioned to aviation," Kit continued, "I realized that aircraft under combat stress exhibit the same types of systemic responses. Electronic systems, hydraulic systems, pilot psychology, they're all interconnected, and they all provide diagnostic information if you know how to read the signs." She drew additional connections, showing how understanding one type of system enhanced understanding of others. The electronic warfare systems we use today work because they exploit the same types of systematic vulnerabilities that I learned to recognize in medical practice. Find the critical system, understand its dependencies, introduce controlled stress at the right point, and the entire system responds in predictable ways. Webb stared at the whiteboard, his engineering background suddenly making connections he had never considered possible. You're treating aircraft like patients. I'm treating complex systems like complex systems, Kit corrected. The principles are universal. What changes is the application. She turned to face him directly, her expression becoming more serious. Lieutenant, the reason you've been standing outside my office is because you recognize that what you witnessed represents more than advanced flying techniques. You're intuitive enough to understand that this is about a completely different way of approaching problems. Webb nodded, feeling like he was on the verge of understanding something fundamental about his own capabilities. The question, Kit continued, is whether you're willing to learn to think in ways that weren't covered in engineering school or flight training. Because what I'm developing here requires people who can adapt their existing knowledge to solve problems that don't have established solutions. She gestured toward the classified manuals and technical diagrams surrounding them. This program is going to need pilots who can think like engineers, strategists, and diagnosticians simultaneously. People who can see patterns across different types of systems and adapt solutions from one field to solve problems in another. Webb felt something shift inside him, a recognition of opportunity that went far beyond conventional pilot training. Ma'am, I want to learn. Whatever this requires, I want to be part of it. Kit studied him for a long moment, her expression mixing evaluation with something that might have been approval. Lieutenant, learning to think this way means abandoning most of what you think you know about fixed solutions and established procedures. Are you prepared for that level of intellectual uncertainty? Yes, ma'am. Webb's response surprised him with its immediacy and conviction. Kit smiled, the expression of someone who had found what she was looking for. Good, because we start tomorrow at 500 hours, and Lieutenant, bring everything you know about engineering systems. You're going to learn to apply it in ways that will challenge everything you thought engineering could accomplish. As Webb left her office, he realized that the woman they had been mocking weeks earlier had just offered him the opportunity to become part of something that would redefine military aviation. The weight of that possibility felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Behind him, Kit returned to her technical manuals and classified diagrams, working to systematize knowledge that could change the balance of global military power. But for just a moment, her expression carried the satisfaction of someone who had recognized potential in an unexpected place and was prepared to nurture it into something unprecedented. The training program that emerged over the following months became legend among military aviation circles, though its existence remained classified at levels that prevented most people from knowing it existed at all. What came to be known internally as Angel of Death School accepted 12 pilots from various branches of the military, selected not for their flying skills, but for their ability to think in patterns that transcended conventional training. Webb found himself among those 12, alongside pilots whose backgrounds ranged from electronic warfare specialists to former medical personnel who had transitioned to aviation. What they shared wasn't superior flying ability, but demonstrated capacity for systemic thinking under extreme stress. The curriculum Kit developed defied every expectation of military training. Days began at 500 hours not with physical conditioning, but with medical case studies that required diagnosing complex systemic failures under time pressure. Students learned to read aircraft systems diagnostics, the same way trauma surgeons read patient vital signs, as interconnected data streams that revealed underlying problems before they became catastrophic failures. Flight training took place in aircraft that had been systematically modified to fail in unpredictable ways. Students learned to maintain control while dealing with cascading system failures, electronic warfare interference, and communication breakdowns that simulated combat conditions where conventional procedures provided no guidance. But the real education took place in evening seminars, where Kit taught the philosophical foundations underlying her approach to aerial combat. Students learned to think of aircraft not as machines, but as extensions of human cognitive and physiological systems. They studied psychological profiles of enemy pilots, learned to predict behavioral patterns under stress, and developed tactics designed to exploit psychological vulnerabilities rather than technical limitations. Combat, Kit explained during one of these sessions, is fundamentally a contest between decision-making systems. The pilot who makes better decisions faster wins, regardless of aircraft capabilities. Everything we're learning is designed to enhance decision-making speed and accuracy under conditions where conventional training provides no guidance. Webb discovered that his engineering background, combined with the systemic thinking Kit was teaching, allowed him to understand aircraft behavior in ways that transcended technical specifications. He learned to feel aircraft systems through control inputs, to diagnose problems through subtle changes in vibration and response, to predict component failures before instruments registered problems. More importantly, he learned to extend that diagnostic capability to opposing aircraft. By understanding how different aircraft systems responded to stress, he could predict enemy pilot decisions, anticipate tactical responses, and create situations where superior technology became disadvantaged by predictable behavioral patterns. The first time Webb successfully outmaneuvered an F-35 using techniques Kit had taught him, he experienced what she called diagnostic revelation. The moment when systemic thinking transcended analytical process and became intuitive response. The enemy aircraft had become as readable as patient vital signs, its pilots' decisions as predictable as physiological responses to stress. After 6 months of training that redefined their understanding of aviation, combat, and human performance under extreme conditions, the 12 students of Angel of Death School had become something unprecedented in military aviation. Pilots who combined technical expertise with diagnostic intuition and strategic thinking to create capabilities that exceeded the sum of their individual skills. But more than that, they had become the foundation of what would eventually emerge as the most significant advancement in air combat since the development of radar technology. Kit watched her students graduate with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully transmitted knowledge that couldn't be found in any manual or curriculum. They carried within them the ability to approach aerial combat as a diagnostic discipline, to read complex systems under stress, and to make life-and-death decisions based on pattern recognition that extended far beyond conventional pilot training. As they prepared to return to their respective units, carrying with them capabilities that would quietly revolutionize air combat effectiveness, Kit realized that Angel of Death had evolved beyond a call sign into something approaching legacy. The systematic transmission of knowledge that could keep people alive in situations where conventional wisdom offered no solutions. The implications of what she had created were still unfolding, but the foundation had been established. 12 pilots now carried the ability to think like combat medics in fighter cockpits, to diagnose aerial combat situations like medical emergencies, and to apply solutions that transcended the limitations of their aircraft or conventional tactics. The future of military aviation had been quietly revolutionized by a woman who had learned to save lives in impossible circumstances, and discovered that the same principles could be applied to winning wars. 2 years after the demonstration that changed everything, the impact of Kit's innovations had spread through classified channels to military commands around the world. The Angel of Death training methodology had been quietly implemented across multiple air forces, creating a generation of pilots whose capabilities exceeded official recognition, but whose effectiveness was undeniable. Lieutenant Webb, now Captain Webb, led a flight of 4 F-16s through simulated combat exercises that would have been impossible before Kit's program. His wingmen, all graduates of Angel of Death School, moved through complex tactical situations with the fluid coordination of surgical teams, their aircraft responding to threats with precision that seemed to anticipate enemy actions before they occurred. But the real measure of Kit's legacy wasn't found in training exercises or classified evaluations. It was found in the survival rates of pilots who had learned to think beyond conventional limitations, in the successful completion of missions that conventional tactics would have declared impossible, and in the quiet recognition among military leadership that aerial warfare had been fundamentally transformed by principles learned in field hospitals under hostile fire. Kit herself had moved beyond day-to-day training into strategic development, working with classified research programs that applied her diagnostic approach to challenges ranging from space-based operations to unmanned aircraft systems. Her methods were being adapted to situations she had never envisioned by people who,